Imagine walking into a Ford dealership, pointing at a brand new Escape on the lot, and the salesperson tells you it starts at $32,000. You nod, maybe wince a little, and you think, okay, that's just what cars cost these days. Now imagine someone walks up beside you, taps you on the shoulder, and says, hey, I just bought an SUV, same size, more tech, costs $15,000. You'd probably laugh. You'd probably say that's impossible. You'd probably think it was some kind of joke. But here's the thing. It's not a joke. It's not a rumor. It's not some sketchy vehicle cobbled together in a backyard. It's a real, full-size SUV rolling off a modern assembly line backed by one of the most powerful manufacturing machines the world has ever seen. And it is coming for the American auto market with a speed and force that has the entire industry sweating through their suits. And the company most terrified right now? Ford Motor Company. Hey, this is Mark, and you're welcome to AUTOSAYS. If you're new here, we cover the real stories behind the automotive industry, the power plays, the financial battles, and the historic shifts that most channels are too afraid to touch. So if that kind of content fires you up, hit that subscribe button right now and tap the bell so you never miss what's coming next. Because what we're about to break down today is not just a car story, it's a power shift. And once you see the full picture, you will never look at your local dealership the same way again. Let's go back in time for a second, because history is the only way to truly understand what's happening right now. In 1908, Henry Ford introduced the Model T, and he did something that nobody had ever done before. He made car ownership possible for ordinary working Americans. Before the Model T, cars were toys for the rich. After it, they became a symbol of freedom, of ambition, of the American dream itself. Ford didn't just build a car, he built an industry, he built a culture, he changed the entire economic structure of the United States. And for over a century, American automakers held that crown. They led the world. Detroit was the capital of global manufacturing. The names Ford, Chevy, and Chrysler weren't just brands, they were institutions. They were part of who America was. But here's where the story gets uncomfortable, and this is the part that Detroit does not want you thinking about too hard, because history has a cruel habit of repeating itself, and right now, something is happening in China that echoes the exact same disruption Ford caused back in 1908. The only difference is, this time, Ford is on the wrong side of it. The vehicle that has everyone panicking is called the BYD Atto 3, and before you scroll away thinking this is some obscure niche product, let me hit you with some numbers that will stop you cold. BYD, which stands for Build Your Dream, sold over 3 million vehicles in 2023 alone. 3 million. To put that in perspective, Ford sold about 2 million vehicles in the United States in that same year, and Ford has been doing this for over 100 years. BYD has only been making passenger cars since the early 2000s. The speed of their rise is not just impressive, it is historically unprecedented, and the Atto 3 sits right at the heart of their assault on the global market. It's a compact electric SUV with a range of around 260 miles, a touchscreen infotainment system that would make a Tesla engineer raise an eyebrow, and a price tag in multiple markets that undercuts every comparable American SUV by $15,000, $20,000, sometimes even $25,000. That is not a small discount. That is a financial earthquake. Now here is where the finance side of the story gets genuinely jaw-dropping, and I need you to stay with me because this is the part that explains everything. How on earth can BYD sell a full-featured electric SUV for $15,000 when Ford can't build a comparable one under $40,000? The answer comes down to three things: vertical integration, scale, and the most aggressive battery cost reduction program in automotive history. Let's break each one down. Vertical integration means BYD makes almost everything in-house. They don't just assemble vehicles. They manufacture their own batteries, their own chips, their own electric motors, their own steel components. Compare that to Ford, which relies on a sprawling web of thousands of outside suppliers for everything from brake brake pads to software systems. Every middleman in that supply chain adds cost. Every contract negotiation, every shipping delay, every quality control check, it all adds up, and it all gets passed on to you, the buyer, at the dealership. BYD cut out most of those middlemen years ago, and the savings are staggering. Then there's scale. China is the largest auto market in the world, and BYD has optimized its entire operation around producing massive volumes at the lowest possible cost per unit. Their factories run around the clock, their workforce is enormous, their logistics network is deeply embedded in the world's most efficient manufacturing ecosystem. When you produce at that scale, costs fall off a cliff. And finally, the batteries. This is the secret weapon that nobody in Detroit talks about openly, because if they did, they'd have to admit just how far behind they really are. BYD developed something called the Blade battery, a lithium iron phosphate battery design that is safer, longer lasting, and significantly cheaper to produce than the lithium-ion packs used by most Western automakers. This battery isn't just a product improvement, it's a fundamental cost breakthrough, and it has given BYD a manufacturing cost advantage so large that some analysts believe no American automaker can match it without a complete reinvention of their entire business model. Let that sink in for a second. Not just an improvement, a complete reinvention. So where does Ford stand in all of this? Well, here's where the story shifts from impressive to genuinely alarming, at least from Detroit's perspective. Ford announced its EV ambitions loudly and expensively. They poured billions into their Model E division. They launched the Mustang Mach-E. They created the F-150 Lightning. They told investors, they told customers, they told the whole world, we are ready for the electric future. And then reality hit them like a freight train. The Mach-E has faced repeated price cuts just to stay competitive. The Lightning has struggled with production delays and ballooning costs. Ford's EV division lost approximately $4.5 billion in a single year. $4.5 billion lost. Not invested in future growth in a way that's paying off, just gone, burned through while trying to figure out how to build electric vehicles profitably in a world where BYD is already doing it at $15,000 a unit. Now let's talk about what this means for the American consumer, because this is where the urgency really kicks in. You might be sitting there thinking, okay, but I can't buy a BYD Atto 3 in the United States. Not yet. And you're right. Right now, a combination of federal tariffs and trade restrictions keeps most Chinese-made vehicles out of the US market. The Biden administration actually raised tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles to 100% in 2024. 100%. That means even a $15,000 BYD would theoretically cost $30,000 after the tariff. Still competitive, by the way, but no longer the gut punch it would be at full force. But here's the cliffhanger nobody's talking about. Tariffs are political tools. They go up, they go down. They get negotiated. They get challenged in international trade courts. And the history of the global auto industry is absolutely littered with examples of trade barriers that seemed permanent right until the moment they weren't. Think about Japan in the 1970s and 1980s. American automakers were convinced that import restrictions and the natural loyalty of American buyers would protect them from the Japanese invasion. They were wrong. Toyota, Honda, and Nissan found ways in through American factories, through political lobbying, through partnerships, through sheer relentless persistence. And by the time Detroit woke up to the threat, those Japanese brands had already won the hearts and wallets of an entire generation of American drivers. The question that keeps automotive analysts up at night right now is whether we're living through the exact same movie just with Chinese subtitles this time. And the evidence is mounting that we are. BYD has already made serious moves outside China. They are dominating markets in Europe, Southeast Asia, Australia, and Latin America. They have opened factories in Hungary and Thailand and Brazil. Smart strategic moves that position them perfectly to supply Western markets without triggering Chinese origin tariffs. Elon Musk himself has said BYD is one of the few companies he genuinely worries about. When the man who built Tesla looks at a competitor and says he's scared, you pay attention. And yet somehow, Ford's leadership continued to project confidence in earnings calls. They continue to talk about their storied legacy, their American manufacturing roots, their deep customer relationships, all of which is true, and none of which is enough on its own to stop a $15,000 SUV from reshaping the market the moment the political winds shift. Here's the part of the story that I find most fascinating from a financial history perspective, and this is the piece that connects everything we've talked about into one clear, undeniable picture. Every single major disruption in the history of the auto industry has followed the same pattern. First, the legacy players dismiss the newcomer. Then they lobby for protection. Then they try to copy the innovation. Then they either adapt or they die. We saw it with Henry Ford disrupting the horse-drawn carriage industry. We saw it with Japanese automakers disrupting Detroit. We saw it with Tesla disrupting the entire concept of what a car dealership and car company should look like. And now we are watching it happen again in real time with Chinese manufacturers and BYD in particular disrupting the entire global cost structure of automobile production. The companies that recognize the pattern early enough and respond with real structural change will survive. The ones that keep betting on tariffs and political protection and brand loyalty alone will not. For Ford, the stakes could not be higher. This is a company with 120 years of history, hundreds of thousands of employees, and a cultural identity tied directly to American manufacturing pride. The thought of being outmaneuvered by a Chinese company that most Americans have never heard of is not just a business problem, it is an existential identity crisis. And that fear, that deep institutional fear of irrelevance, is exactly what you feel every time Ford cuts the price of a Mach-E, or restructures its EV division, or hires another team of battery engineers. They know the threat is real, they are scrambling, and the clock is ticking. So what happens next? Here is my honest read on where this goes. In the short term, tariffs buy Detroit time. Maybe 2 years, maybe 5, but BYD is not sitting still. They are building outside China. They are partnering with local companies in key markets. They are studying every trade barrier and engineering around it with the same methodical patience they applied to their battery technology. The moment a credible BYD product hits the American market at a price point that even tariffs cannot completely neutralize, and that moment is coming, the landscape shifts permanently. For American consumers, that could actually be wonderful news. More competition means lower prices, better technology, more choices. The same thing that happened when Japanese cars entered the market and forced Detroit to finally take quality seriously. American buyers won that round, even as some American companies lost it. The question is whether Ford can find its own version of that story, whether it can reinvent itself fast enough to compete in a world where the manufacturing rules have fundamentally changed. Because at the end of the day, this is not really a story about one Chinese SUV and one American car company. It is a story about the relentless nature of economic progress. It is a story about what happens when innovation outpaces tradition. It is a story about the courage, or lack of it, that determines which giants survive and which ones become cautionary tales in future history books. Henry Ford once said that if he had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. The people at BYD didn't ask what people wanted, they just built a $15,000 electric SUV that works, and now the whole industry has to figure out how to respond. That is the power shift. That is the real story. And wherever it ends up, you're going to want a front row seat. So if you're not already subscribed to AUTOSAYS, now is absolutely the time. Hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment below telling me whether you think Ford survives this or whether we are watching the beginning of the end of an American icon. And stay tuned, because the next chapter of this story is going to move faster than any of us expect.